Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we speed paint using oils. In the last video I teased your curiosity with a basic and beginner-friendly process, using oil paints on a single model. And today I want to show you how you can use the same concepts and cool new ideas working on multiple models, and in a context more focused on gaming. I know the word speed painting already contains all these ideas, but I want to make clear that, unlike my usual where I use a lot of tricks and shortcuts, I didn't really make any effort to make this a speedrun, and it was simply the natural behavior of oils to keep the work easy, and in a little more than 4 hours. I chose the Canaan's Reapers because I imagine this like a paint-along video, and these models are very forgiving and in general quite easy to paint. We have a big guy with large flat areas to practice free-flowing blends, and small figures that need a progressively finer control on paint and brush, still with the same tight scheme, so you don't have to handle a ton of colors. There is also a variety of different materials on the sculpts. Of course, a lot of bone, but also leather, fabric, sand and rocks on the bases, and metallic and non-metallic metals at the same time. So great to practice real and painted textures. I also used the original color scheme and aimed with some improvements to the official box art, to show you that style and look don't depend on the paint you use, but on how you use it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to always know what happens on the channel. And if you want to support my work, like, comment, share, watch another video, and maybe check my Patreon page, where you can find the real-time footage of my videos, with every single little line and brushstroke. Thanks a million, guys! I start as always with the zenithal light. The models are packed with well-defined details, so I don't need strange or complicated angles. I tilt the figure upside down to get the sharpest angle possible, and I spray at full force to obtain a strong vertical contrast, not so different from the one you can get from simple spray cans. This step is totally optional, and like with acrylics, depending on your color scheme, you can start working from any color, but a zenithal light, especially in speed painting, or in your first experiments with oils, really helps in maximizing the basic value contrast. When the paint is dry, there are no compatibility issues between the acrylic and oil layer, and at any stage you can freely jump from one to another as you wish. Working on color schemes with extreme value jumps, I like to set a quick acrylic base for the darker tones. With some notable exceptions like cadmium and chrome-based colors, oil paints are much more transparent than acrylics, especially the basic dark hues. You can compensate this translucency with a thicker layer, but this dramatically increases the drying time, and even if it's not a problem on a canvas, it can be annoying on miniatures. I like to use contrast paints because they are super efficient in quickly setting this layer. And thanks to their transparency, I can maintain and even enhance the contrast and gradient of the zenithal. But you can simply use classic acrylics without losing too much. Oils are still the main protagonist, and they will boost and add again all this information in a better way in the next stage. In general, for something like the deep blue-violet armors, a proper dark opaque base is a better starting point, like starting from black to paint Black Templar, for example. But as you'll see later, I want to use the armors to show you a specific kind of soft blend, and this light, transparent coat is all I need to separate these elements from the main lighter tones. Let's move to oils, and now that you know the basics, I can focus a bit more on the colors, and how I usually create my palettes. Again, I strongly suggest you to watch this video up here before this one. The actual colors obviously depend on what you're painting, but I always have on the palette black and white, and two versions of the main tones of the scheme, one warmer and one colder. You can easily see from the paint samples on the tubes how cadmium red is brighter and warmer than alizarin crimson, and the gradient of temperature in the blue tones. Similar idea in my selection of earth and yellow colors. That's a bit wider because I have a ton of bone to paint. And in the dark bridge colors, the classic bluish Payne's Grey and its warmer violet version. Again, two tones to cover the green spectrum, and a single deep cold violet. but only because I consider it part of the red spectrum. So it's an extension of the cadmium red alizarin crimson progression that becomes a bit colder with every jump. The idea behind this kind of palette is to efficiently maximize the temperature contrast of the whole paint job from its very beginning, starting the work with a ton of what we can call potential contrast already on the palette. I'm sure that you are starting to see the secret pattern behind the process. The zenithal gives me the value contrast. The color scheme gives me the chromatic contrast. And the actual paints on the palette give me the temperature contrast. I barely touch the brush, but the elements for a high quality paint job are all already there. When I plan or explain this stuff, it always feels like the crazy scheme of a supervillain. But I swear, the process is really easy to replicate when you know the secrets behind it. As always, these ideas are the foundation of the mindset of every other kind of painter. But as miniature painters, we have to retro-engineer and dig a bit more. Or read some non-miniature related books. Choose your lesser evil. I slap my darker colors on the models following the map of the color scheme. Using oil washes, white spirit is probably the cornerstone of the process, and its relative quantity in the mix is what creates all the various effects and behaviors. But painting with oils is barely part of the workflow. I have just a few milliliters in my cups, using it mostly to clean my application brushes, and I use it in microscopic quantities to thin down just a bit the thicker colors. So don't worry about fumes or smells, because you'll almost forget to have it on the table. Thicker oil paint sticks better to the model, and even more important, to the previous layers of paint, without passively messing with what you have already in place. So be careful with the thinner, because it's not gentle or forgiving like water on acrylics. The logic of the placement is really straightforward. I simply use the dark violet and the blue tones on the armors, Payne's grey and indigo on the colder bones of the equipment, and the dark browns on the main bodies. The technical objective of this stage is to cover the models in wet, oily medium to facilitate the flow of the paint. But my main aesthetic goal is to put in place all the extreme dark definition. Oil paints can have an important staining power when they first meet the acrylic layer, but I don't use it too much to set my tones. The staining properties can vary depending on the brand of the paint, native pigment concentration, dilution, subtype of thinner, finish and other properties of the acrylic layer, and so on. And I find all this variability too unreliable to be a proper foundational layer. It works like a charm to create natural random tones, especially on very organic subjects, but if I really want a specific color in a specific place from the beginning, I prefer to play safe and set it in acrylics. Immediately after this loose application on the single model, I quickly remove the excess with makeup sponges and just a few gentle passes, trying to be relatively precise in how I touch the surface, to avoid an excessive random mixing of the different, often clashing or complementary tones. Like when removing the excess of a wash, I also try to work perpendicularly to the details, so I can't go easily inside them with a sponge and remove too much paint. There isn't a real rule about how long you should wait between application and cleaning, but in general, if you need a stronger impact and more staining, let the paint soak a bit more into the acrylic layer. In this case, I want to keep most of the light values of the main bodies, and the other important colors of the scheme have already the properties of the acrylic underpainting, so I can clean immediately. I don't have to rush or run in any way. Oils rarely cause instant reactions, and the difference in timing we are talking here is measured in slow minutes, or even more if you want the effect of ancient oxidized bones. You'll have for sure to make some experiments to find a good balance, because a lot depends on your specific paints and tools, but their relations are pretty easy to figure out. Again, I just want the details and the extreme shadows to be super visible and full of wet paint, so I can work around them and inside their borders, and use that accumulated paint to boost and blend my shadows. The big guy is for sure the most complicated piece. But even if there's still a lot to do on everyone, the members of the Mortec Guard are already pretty cool. And you can see the clear jump between the different types of bone. Even if I use oils quite often, the acrylic workflow is part of the involuntary movements of my hands. And in the middle of the work, I have the tendency to grab the first brush in range. You know that the blending brushes have to be always absolutely dry. So trying to keep mistakes to a minimum, I keep the application brushes on my left and the blending brushes on my right. But often having the two brushes in hand at the same time. Or in my mouth. To quickly switch between the two. Since the oil workflow is really quick and efficient and I don't have to worry about paint drying or changing properties on the palette, I didn't work in assembly line as usual. But for the sake of clarity, I'm going to show you examples of the work on specific parts on different models, as if they happen in sequence. The only proper separated stage is the work on edge highlights and fine details, but mostly because I had to move to another side of the palette to better record the process. Thanks to its natural flow and soft volumes, the work on the blue-green fabric is super simple and completed in few brushstrokes with the basic process of direct application and blend. The base tone is already quite dark, and the initial wash created strong, deep shadows. Plus, I want this color to be simple and striking, so I just need to focus on the lights. The most interesting thing in this example is that I suddenly decide to go for a more powerful green note, and all I have to do is just to change color, apply it on the folds, and blend it directly on top of the lights I've already painted. The action of the blending brush leaves on the model just a microscopic quantity of paint, so you can always add new colors. And in the extreme situation of an artistic paintimento, well, you can simply erase the area with a bit of pure white spirit. The next stage of your training as oil painters is to start working with multiple colors at the same time, suddenly making the process even faster. In the first stage, I used the different values of the brown tones and yellow ochre to quickly set my shadows. I apply more dark tones in the lower parts of the model to enhance the idea of the main light coming from above, and everywhere I find a deeper detail, a strong undercut or a curve moving downwards. I use progressively more yellow ochre going up, applying it as light shadow in the ideal space under the midtones, and even as a strong shadow when I arrive to the light exposed areas of arms and head. In the same way, I apply pure white in every part where I want a strong highlight, playing with the contrast of these shapes that sometimes are rounded and smooth, and sometimes sharp and almost geometric. With all the tones in place, I can start blending the smudges of paint with the midtone and with each other, using gentle brushstrokes that follow the shape of the area I'm painting. This exercise is really useful to understand how you should start seeing the world to better translate it in painting. When you strip away from an object everything you know about it, what remains are just abstract shapes and their colors. And that's the only stuff you really need when painting. If you feel less inclined to philosophy and these ontological problems, or you are simply running to complete your army for an upcoming tournament, here is a trick that will blow your mind. I apply the shadows with the same logic and in the same practical way, and I quickly blend them with the base tone. Now imagine a parallel universe where dry brushing, yes, dry brushing, creates gentle, soft, progressive blends like the best glazing possible, with just a couple of brush strokes of a big flat brush. Oil paint can precisely do that. I dip the brush in thick white paint, I remove the excess on the paper towel, and I slowly move it over details and volumes with just a bit of pressure. The huge difference is that the paint is far from being dry, and every brushstroke applies and blends paint with all the previous colors. The first point of contact is where the color has maximum opacity and intensity, and the outer borders simply fade into the other hues by themselves. And if for some reason your finish is not as smooth as you want it, or you see marks like a dry brush with acrylics, you simply have to take a clean blending brush and soften the application. I talk a lot about smoothness, but one of the best aspects of working with thick paint is how easy you can use it to create movement and subtle textures. Kainan's leather skirt is painted from start to finish with a heavy stippling to make it on every visual level something different from the rest of the model. The natural thickness of the unblended paint creates a ton of real and painted movement, but because the paint remains playable for a longer time, the different layers tend to blend, becoming less obvious and easy to distinguish. And it can be easily used to create progressive lights fully made by textures in a matter of minutes. I want also to show you that even if I warned you about the risks of using too much thinner, white spirit by himself is not a real problem if you don't add a strong or intentional rubbing action with the brush. Here I use a red wash to underline the seams of the cape, and with a gentle touch I soften the sharp edges with all the rest. If you need super soft blends like the ones of a reflective non-metallic metal, instead of working on top of the starting midtone, you can first apply a uniform layer of oil paint, in this case pure Egyptian violet, and place a strong light directly on this more wet, more active, and more receptive layer. The blend you obtain is a perfect, soft, progressive mix of the two tones that are really mixing with each other in that spot. And you can repeat this step multiple times to increase the value of a more and more specific little area, still maintaining that crazily soft progression. Remaining in the metallics department, you can easily use all these techniques, adding to your palette some metallic oil paints. Look at how this silver perfectly covers the blade with a uniform, super reflective layer. You can blend other colors directly in the metallic layer for a more non-metallic sensation. But if you want to go full metal, you can pre-mix the color you want with silver on the palette, and then transfer the metallic color on the model. And the blending stage always works in the same simple way. The paint job naturally becomes more and more defined with every light, shadow and blend. But extreme lights, edge highlights and extra details are always a must to complete the work, and make every little shape jump out in the distance of the battlefield. I'm in the same session, with the same active paint over the models, and even if easy blending is part of the oil's charm, I can easily paint thin, sharp details on top of everything. I thin down the paint a bit more to obtain a better flow on the tip of the brush, but it's still quite thick if we compare it to acrylics. Edge highlights become pure joy, because the brush doesn't face any attrition, and the heavy body wet paint catches and grabs every little element and edge by itself. And as always, if you make a mistake, you can make it disappear blending it or cleaning it. As always, to make these videos, I have to select a few bits of the most important parts of the work. But if you want to see the full real-time process, you can find all the footage on my Patreon page. And here is the final result. I stayed in the usual 4-5 hours I usually need for this kind of warbands, but without using airbrush tricks, shortcuts, or even an assembly line approach, simply painting the models one by one. Oils really break the step-by-step mindset of acrylics, making the whole work more organic and painterly. Midtones, lights and shadows can happen all at the same time, and you can see immediately how they interact, and the space they take, without the need of sketching or planning anything in advance. Every brushstroke pushes the work forward, without the need of extra back and forth. But at any stage, you can change, fix, or even erase everything with just a couple of brushstrokes. So yeah, you should give oil paints a try. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!